In the office, a man sat across from the girl, adjusting his glasses. He excitedly told her she wouldn't die, as she had been misdiagnosed. He asked for her forgiveness. The girl, her violet eyes wide with shock, could hardly believe his words. Just recently, Lariette Blanchett had been diagnosed with only 3 months to live. Nervously, she laughed. She had spent those months doing everything she'd ever wanted, believing her death was near. The doctor, however, was confused by her reaction, thinking the news would bring her relief. But Larette's mind was already spinning. She was being pursued by Duke Candle, the great sword of the Empire and god of war, who had sworn to find her wherever she might go. Now, learning that she'd never been sick at all, she felt utterly lost. Jumping out of her chair in a panic, she couldn't understand how to process the new reality. Meanwhile, the doctor, oblivious to her inner turmoil, shared in the joy of the good news. It had all begun 3 months earlier. Lariette had started feeling strange and decided to visit a doctor. She had complained of insomnia and feeling unwell after eating spicy food, as if her heart was racing. After listening to her symptoms, the doctor adjusted his glasses and warned her not to be shocked, as he suspected she had Radura disease, a rare and incurable condition. On hearing this, Lariette was stunned. The doctor explained that Radura occurred in individuals born with an excess of mana and had a 98% fatality rate. He then dropped the devastating news. She had 3 months to live. In a daze, Lariette barely remembered leaving the office. She wasn't ready to die, so she resolved to make a bucket list and complete every item on it. Back in her room, Lariette sat as her maid, Anne, combed her pink hair. Suddenly, Lariette declared that she would fulfill her entire list before she died. She turned to Anne and asked what she would do if she had only a short time left to live. Anne, caught off guard by the unusual question, quickly composed herself, picked up the comb and playfully spoke into it as though it were a microphone. She declared that besides wanting to serve her lady until death, nothing else came to mind. Lariette, touched by her maid's loyalty, told Anne she wanted to buy all kinds of cakes and take a bite of each, without caring about the waste. Ignoring Anne's practical concerns, Lariette insisted on her plan. However, Anne directed her lady to dinner with her family, knowing they couldn't miss the meal. Lariette wasn't eager to go. She had a strained relationship with her family, and sitting at the same table with them was always a challenge. Her father, the 5th Grand Duke of Blanc, was bent on selling her off to a wealthy older marquis to salvage the family's finances. Once a powerful and influential family, they had gone bankrupt. Her mother, Duchess Blanchett, shared her husband's ambitions, pushing Lariette to marry for money. Lariette, despite being the second child, had received no formal support or education. Her brother Ron, the beloved heir, had completed all the inheritance courses, while she was only trained to work in his office as an assistant. Still, Lariette played the part of a naive fool, knowing it was safest to stay silent, to avoid her family's ire. Suddenly, her older brother Ron burst into the dining room. Loved by the family, he always looked down on Lariette. With an irritated tone, he asked why she was there. Unfazed, Lariette calmly replied that she was also part of the family, and had every right to be at the table. The main character suddenly grinned and asked her brother if he was struggling with his studies, mentioning that Joel, their personal magic tutor, had been unusually quiet and gloomy lately. This remark visibly embarrassed Ron, and Lariette couldn't help but smirk to herself. She knew she could outshine her idiot brother if she wanted to. In response, Ron grabbed a glass from the table and, with an exaggerated "oops," poured its contents over Larette's head, drenching her hair and staining her dress. His actions were obviously out of spite, though he pretended it was an accident. Looking at her with a dissatisfied sneer, he announced that she had ruined his appetite. Turning to their parents, Ron said he wouldn't eat until his sister left the room. Lariette stared at him with eyes full of hatred, waiting for her parents to finally reprimand him. But instead, they shocked her by asking her not to provoke Ron and to be respectful. Her mother even ordered her to go upstairs and clean herself immediately. Stunned, Lariette had no choice but to obey. As she walked to the door, she glanced back at her family in disbelief. Her brother got away with everything, and her parents always took his side. But in that moment, Lariette didn't care. After all, she was going to die in 3 months, and none of them would care when that happened. Opening the door, she began to realize that nobody in that room would be affected by her death. This thought made her heart ache. No one needed her, and she didn't want to die being seen as a naive fool. From that moment on, Lariette decided she would live for herself and do as she pleased. Later, sitting at her desk, Lariette stared at a blank piece of paper. On April 3, 732, according to the imperial calendar, Lariette Blanchett had been given a 3-month death sentence. Quietly, she began to write her wish list for her remaining time. The list only had 5 items, some serious and others simple, but each represented her new resolve to live for herself. She completed the list with a sad smile, realizing she had no real regrets. She had devoted her entire life to her family, but now she wanted to live for herself. Her first wish was to treat Anne, her maid, to a cake. Seeing the joy on Anne's face warmed Larette's heart a little. As they travelled together in a carriage, heading somewhere special, the vehicle suddenly jolted. The girls nearly jumped from their seats. The coachman quickly apologised, explaining that one of the wheels seemed to be stuck in a hole and he would try to fix it. Lariette peeked out the window and offered to help, suggesting she could quickly handle the problem. Anne also looked out, assessing the situation. The coachman, flustered, asked them to stay inside, as it wasn't appropriate for a lady to involve herself. He then warned them to stay discreet, as a carriage belonging to Duke Candle was nearby. The Duke held a powerful position in society, and his family was considered the strongest in the empire. There were rumours that he was a monster, and even Lariette felt a twinge of fear at the thought of him. But then, hearing a strange sound, she instinctively turned toward the window. She was met by the piercing blue eyes of a man standing just outside, incredibly close. Lariette, as if enchanted, couldn't look away from him. The dark-haired man, with seemingly effortless strength, lifted their carriage with one hand, freeing the wheel from the hole. It was the Duke himself, helping them in the most unexpected way. Afterwards, the Duke turned around and walked back to his carriage, leaving Lariette to mentally thank him for his unexpected help. The Marquis of Sarah, confused by her avoidance, pulled her into an embrace, suggesting that once they were married, she would never leave their bed. Lariette recalled her to-do list for the next 3 months, and item 3 was clear. Break off the engagement to the Marquis, preferably with a scandal. The Marquis leaned in close, whispering that he found her face delicious, and that he was very attracted to her. Lariette recoiled in disgust as a sly grin spread across his face, his intentions clear. Escaping his vile embrace, Lariette realized she could no longer stand it. Item 3 had to be completed today. With a fierce determination, she began to wave her hands, casting a spell. Strange symbols appeared in the air, and a force pulled the Marquis upward, hanging him upside down. Lariette decided that today was the day to rid herself of all the unpleasant things in her life, starting with the engagement. The Blanc family had long been known for producing powerful wizards, and Lariette was no exception. She was a true sorceress, gifted with magical talent that surpassed even her older brother Rayon's. Rayon, the family's heir, had always been jealous of Larette's abilities, and though she wasn't supposed to, she often watched him practice magic. However, She had never learned to use her skills properly, as her family focused on training Rayon, while Lariette was left to do menial tasks. Back in the present, Lariette used her magic to suspend the Marquis upside down. A massive vine appeared from the ground and wrapped around his leg, holding him in place. This magic was the result of lessons she'd taken with a teacher who knew of her talent. Looking down at him, Lariette declared that she would only explain herself once, and that he should listen carefully. She leaned in close to his face, grinning as she announced that she had no intention of marrying him. From that day forward, their engagement was officially over. Placing a hand over his mouth, Lariette told him he was nothing more than trash, who valued people only for their wealth. Just as she was about to say more, she was interrupted by the familiar voice of her father. Her mother and father rushed out of the estate, shocked and fearful. They had planned to sell their daughter to the Marquis for financial gain. The head of the family used magic to free the Marquis from the vine, and the man fell from a small height, trembling as he glared at Lariette. He vowed he would never forget the humiliation she had caused him. Her parents immediately rushed to apologize, explaining that Lariette was simply immature and foolish for her age. The Marquis, however, insisted that they pretend the engagement had never happened. Lariette couldn't believe her family. They cared more about money than their own daughter. The Marquis, too, was no better, buying people as if they were slaves. Exhausted by the entire situation, Lariette watched as her father escorted the Marquis to the mansion to calm him down. Meanwhile, her mother scolded her, calling her crazy for ruining everything. Lariette responded that she had actually been too late to do this, and that at least someone in the house wasn't completely mad. Her father, hearing her defiant tone, approached her and slapped her across the face, leaving a red mark on her cheek. Lariette had not expected this kind of punishment from him. He was furious with her, but she felt as though she were in a trance. Each passing minute only made her more disillusioned with her family. Her father demanded to know if Lariette understood what she had done. He explained that he was already determined to pay off the family's debts, but Lariette wasn't going to let him off that easily. She gently placed a hand on her cheek, a faint smile appearing on her face as she asked her parents if it was her fault that the family was in such debt. Why should she be the one to pay for their mistakes? She told them plainly that they had done nothing for her. They had shown no interest in her well-being or love, and her father had only decided to sell her to secure money and fame. To him, she was nothing more than a commodity to be traded. Her mother and father immediately reacted, listing all the things they had provided for her: clothes, food, a roof over her head, and claimed that she owed them for living like a princess. Lariette, looking up at them, retorted that she had done more than enough. She had taken on her brother's responsibilities with the estate's office work and had become nothing more than a bargaining chip to cover their debts. They didn't understand why she was rebelling now. Her father, enraged, insisted that he had cherished his daughter, but now he saw her rebellion as an unforgivable betrayal. He declared that she would be erased from the family register. After hearing her father's words, even her mother became visibly nervous. But Lariette understood that the family's threats were nothing more than words on a piece of paper. She explained to them that, for so long, she had been afraid of hurting their feelings, but now it didn't matter anymore. Bowing her head, she thanked them for everything before turning and walking away. Her father shouted after her, warning that she couldn't take anything with her, but Lariette didn't even look back. She wasn't sure what emotions she was feeling now. Perhaps a sense of liberation? It had seemed like something she longed to do for a long time, but she never had the strength to act on it. As she walked away, her brother Rayon caught up with her, calling out her name. She stopped, but made it clear that she didn't need his company. Rayon, grinning, suggested they would call it a regular farewell. And then he asked, with a hint of arrogance, how she could dare to spoil the family's mood just by being there. He believed himself superior to her, even going so far as to mock her magical ability. Rayan sneered that his sister didn't even know how to properly use earth magic, let alone any other element. Determined to teach her a lesson, Rayan directed a powerful stream of energy at her. Lariette didn't flinch. She knew his tricks were weak. Without hesitation, she pushed his magic back with a wave of her own, the force strong enough to move him from his position. Rayan was taken aback, clearly shocked by her power. His own energy boomeranged, knocking him backward. Lariette stood her ground, the situation now entirely in her control. She managed to trap Rayan in a swirling magical vortex that sucked him into his neck, leaving him panicked and struggling. But Lariette, with a determined look, ignored his pleas and walked away. Once outside, she felt a rush of freedom. Finally, she was away from that suffocating house. She thought of Anne, how she had once cried when her maid had left. Lariette had been desperate to follow Anne at the time, but now she felt a little relief. She had completed 3 items on her to-do list in just one day, leaving only 2 left to accomplish. Since the main character had only 3 months left to live, she planned to make the most of her time. One of her goals was to meet a man with more experience, someone easy to date in the short time she had left. She had already imagined various types of men she would like to meet in the next few months. Though Lariette had some money, she knew it wouldn't be enough to live freely. To truly live without relying on others, she needed more. And to get more, she had to do what she was best at. Opening the door to a rather mysterious establishment, Lariette hoped to secure a better job as a purification magician. Purification magic wasn't as popular or as effective as healing magic, and it demanded a lot of mana. It couldn't be used on people with higher or divine magic, nor could it be used on oneself. When she asked about a position, the employee coldly informed her that they weren't looking for purification magicians. Healing magicians were far more in demand, and Lariette was quickly dismissed, told not to waste their time. After this first failure, Lariette felt defeated. She wasn't sure if she should even bother looking for another job. Just as she began to lose hope, something unexpected happened. 2 men grabbed the bag from her belt and ran off. Lariette immediately screamed, hoping to draw attention to the theft, but the passers-by ignored her. They mocked her for being a purification magician, as if her magic posed no threat. Feeling the sting of humiliation, Lariette decided to act. She called upon her elemental powers, summoning a burst of fire to throw at the thieves. Without hesitation, she ran after them, determined to retrieve what was hers. As the thieves screamed in terror, Lariette knew she couldn't let them escape. They ran, glancing around in panic, but they still clung to the stolen bag. Just then, a man in a tuxedo appeared, walking calmly ahead of them. It was unclear whether he had heard her cries for help, but as the thieves drew closer, he slowly turned his head to face them. When they finally saw his face, it was as if a divine hand had crafted it. His features were nothing short of perfection. Dark hair, thin black eyebrows, and piercing blue eyes. His face was a masterpiece, each part fitting together like a work of art created by a deity. His appearance could be called the most ideal in the world, so striking that it could captivate both men and women alike. However, as the thieves approached, they were hit by an overwhelming, unpleasant smell. Decay, like the scent of rotting corpses. The man looked down at them as though they were insects, and the thieves immediately realized who stood before them. The Duke, Monster Cadell. With a swift motion, the Duke drew a sharp blade and, without a hint of hesitation, sliced through the thieves with one clean swing. They were cut in two, not even a blink of his eye betraying the brutality of the act. The rumours of his nickname, the Monster, were clearly true. Lariette wasn't particularly surprised by this. The Duke picked up the bag from the ground and handed it to her. It was only then that Lariette realised that the coachman who had helped earlier wasn't just any coachman. It was the Duke himself. The Duke, from the most prestigious ducal family in the house and empire, was none other than Esser Cadell, known as the greatest sword in the empire. He was a military genius, having won a war that seemed impossible to win, and was infamous for his cruel leadership. But for Lariette, the most striking thing about him was not his reputation. It was his beauty. His face was so perfect that, in her current situation, she could almost feel it wouldn't be a pity to die looking at him. Though she noticed the unpleasant scent the Duke exuded, Lariette found herself oddly unfazed. His face was so captivating that it seemed to overwhelm all her other senses. She turned away, suddenly thinking that, with a face like that, he would certainly be a popular figure in romantic circles. But she knew he was famous for his composure, which meant that courting him was probably out of the question. The Duke regarded Lariette with indifference, likely assuming she came from a noble family and was unaccompanied. As he stared at her, it seemed he was still searching for something, perhaps something he hadn't yet found. When he took a closer look at her, Lariette realised she was slightly frightened. Not of him specifically, but perhaps because everyone else seemed to fear him. Without hesitation, she reached out and pulled on his sleeve, asking for his forgiveness with a smile. She then asked if the Duke had a girlfriend, explaining that she was simply drawn to his appearance. With no hesitation, she boldly asked if he would be willing to meet with her for 3 months in order to check off one of the items on her list. Realising that her approach might have been a little abrupt, she introduced herself with a smile and asked for his name, apologising for the bluntness of her request. The Duke, looking slightly dumbfounded, answered her question. His voice, deep and resonant, fascinated Lariette, and she immediately complimented him on it. To her, it sounded like music, and she found herself enchanted by his voice. The Duke, however, seemed perplexed. He couldn't understand why this girl wasn't terrified of him like everyone else. He assumed this was some sort of joke, and before she could say more, he asked if she had seen how he had slain the thieves. His cold gaze and aura of death were undeniable, and his reputation as a monster was well earned. Turning away, the Duke told her to stop joking and walked off, casting a few glances back at her. Perhaps, he thought, she was a little interesting, but he couldn't bring himself to take her seriously. Lariette, on the other hand, was thrilled. She found him incredibly attractive, and his charisma only added to the allure. But there was one glaring issue. He didn't have a heroine like herself in his life, and she was determined to change that. Later that evening, sitting in a bar with a drink in hand, Lariette found herself pondering how she could meet the Duke again. As if on cue, she overheard a conversation about the Duke and an information guild. She immediately perked up and moved toward the discussion. One of the men was talking about rumours regarding a purification wizard. Lariette joined them, sitting down at their table and asking about the rumours. They told her that the Duke was under a terrible curse, one so powerful that anyone who got too close to him could smell death in the air. The curse was apparently so strong that only a purification wizard could remove it. While they spoke, Lariette nonchalantly ate from their table, absorbing the details of the conversation. It seemed the Duke was desperately searching for a purification wizard to lift the curse that had haunted him for so long. While Lariette continued to eat, the man at the table spoke about how rare purification wizards were. He explained that this type of magic consumed far more mana than other forms, which made it less popular. It was needed to dispel curses, but more people died from swords than from curses, which is why finding a good purification wizard was so difficult. Listening to this, Lariette began to think that she had to venture into the tiger's den to save Asha. She was determined and would do whatever it took. A week later, she arrived at the right place. Smiling, Lariette approached the Duke, catching him off guard. He was standing next to another man, both of them studying papers. They looked up, surprised, clearly not expecting anyone to arrive so suddenly. Lariette smiled again, explaining that she was sure the Duke might be frightened by their unexpected meeting. Without hesitation, she asked if they could at least start with a simple employer-employee relationship, wanting to approach the situation carefully to avoid scaring him off. Asha was uncertain whether he was surprised or scared, trying to process her boldness, but before he could react, Lariette introduced herself once again, bowing to him. This time, she gave her full name and declared herself the best purification wizard in the entire empire. She boldly stated that she could save the young Duke from his curse, which caused him visible surprise. In return, Lariette didn't ask for money or marriage. Instead, she made a simple request. She needed housing. As she spoke, Lariette handed Asha a piece of paper and asked him to sign it. She then explained that the reason she knew the exact moment to arrive was because of the man standing beside the Duke. She threatened him, revealing that information about the Duke's search for a purification wizard had been leaked, something Asha wouldn't appreciate. In exchange for silence, she had made a deal with him to turn off 3 light bulbs at the entrance as a signal for her. The man, still eyeing Lariette with an unsettling expression, seemed curious to know if she could truly back up her words. He warned that if this was a joke, she would never see the light of day again. Lariette, however, was not afraid. She had studied magic her whole life, and purification magic was no exception. She knew this was her only chance, especially since her time was limited. Lariette grabbed the man's hand without hesitation. At first he was confused, but then it became clear. Lariette demonstrated her magic, focusing all her energy on healing his hand, even if just for a moment, to prove her words were true. As she touched him, light filled the room around her, but the curse consumed much more mana than she anticipated. It seemed to drain every bit of her strength, and when she finally released his hand, she felt completely drained. Asha looked at her, initially skeptical. He had lived with this curse for so long and was certain that nothing could change it. He had been warned long ago that the curse would cause his flesh to rot and spread the smell of death wherever he went. He expected nothing from Lariette, thinking that once again he would be disappointed. But when Lariette removed her glove from his hand, Asha saw something he could hardly believe. A perfectly healthy human hand. The miracle had happened. It was as if the curse had been broken. Lariette, exhausted, handed him her contract once more, urging him to sign it. Moments later, she collapsed from the effort. The Duke, astonished, realized that this was the only miracle that could truly break his curse. He caught her before she could fall to the floor, gently holding her shoulders to prevent her from collapsing. Asha made up his mind then. He would never let this girl go until her work was complete. He gripped her tightly, remembering the terms of their agreement. He would provide her with room and board for the next 3 months. When Lariette finally awoke, she found herself lying in a soft bed in a luxurious room. Asha was sitting next to her, waiting for her to regain consciousness. He explained that she was now in his family's estate, in the Duke's quarters, and that he had brought her there because it was part of the contract. If she found this rude, he offered to take her back to her home. However, Lariette quickly replied that there was no need. A few seconds later, Asha handed her the signed contract, sealing their agreement. As Lariette gazed at him, a thought struck her. The Duke had signed her papers. He had agreed because she was the first person who had been able to influence his curse. Joy surged through her, and without hesitation, she rushed to him. Although a hug might be a bit too forward, a simple handshake would suffice to celebrate. She extended her hand, shaking his, while he looked at her in confusion. The girl reassured him with a smile, promising to take care of everything. Asher, still processing the situation, replied that their relationship would remain professional, just employer and employee. He then wondered why Lariette wasn't afraid of his hands. He couldn't quite understand her. She, on the other hand, suggested that perhaps she wasn't exactly his type, but with a sly grin, she mused that tastes could change for anyone. Asher, slightly alarmed by her words, even expressed his concern, suggesting she was still recovering and should rest in bed. He told her to take it easy today so they could talk tomorrow, then left the room. Lariette, still buzzing with excitement, squealed into her pillow. Her face flushed bright red, thinking aloud that showing someone your face immediately after waking up should be considered illegal. And then, as drug and Dresden was when they shared a bed, she still couldn't understand how someone like him could be so handsome. Meanwhile, Asher stood outside the door, listening to her heartfelt admiration. Her words embarrassed him to the point of madness. No one had ever spoken to him like that before, and it made him feel utterly perplexed. He thought to himself that Lariette was truly strange. The next day, when Asher was busy with paperwork and sipping tea in his office, Lariette unexpectedly appeared, silently watching him. Noticing her presence, Asher decided to ask if she had anything to say. She simply replied that she was waiting for him to stop pretending he didn't notice her. Then, she asked why he hadn't eaten with her earlier. Asher, taken aback, didn't understand what she meant. So Lariette quickly explained that she had been waiting for him because she thought they would have breakfast together. Surprised, he commented that it seemed she had a good appetite. Lariette, a bit confused, didn't quite grasp his point, but Asher interrupted, asking how much she knew about his curse. Pulling up a chair, Lariette replied that she knew nothing about it. Asher explained that it was a curse of the dead, a powerful curse that caused his skin to rot like the flesh of the deceased. He pointed to the bandages wrapped around his body, revealing that they were enchanted to prevent the odor from escaping. Even purification magic only slowed the rotting process, but it could never lift the curse completely. Lariette asked when he had been cursed, and Asher revealed that it happened when he was 7. He added that the curse was incurable, as killing the caster or destroying the curse itself was impossible. He knew it was a hopeless situation. Asher then thought that Lariette might run away from him after hearing such grotesque details. However, he was prepared to do whatever it took to keep her close, since she might be the one who could lift the curse. Unexpectedly, Lariette grabbed his hand, asking if the curse caused him pain. She didn't fully understand what he was going through, but she could tell it must be hard for him. Looking at him, she promised to remove the terrible curse that had tormented him for so long. Asher, staring into her eyes, was at a loss for words. No one had ever treated him like this before, and for the first time, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope. Asher turned away, still trying to make sense of why this woman was not afraid of him. On the contrary, she seemed drawn to him. Everyone else avoided him because of his decaying skin, the result of the curse. But Lariette treated him as if he were an ordinary man, looking at him as if he were handsome and charming. This sudden change in perspective made him feel strange, and for the first time his ego stirred. Lariette took his hand once more, determined to ease his torment. She used her remaining energy to work her magic, and Asher, concerned, asked her to stop. But she didn't listen, so he grabbed her hand to stop her himself. As he did, he noticed how delicate her wrists were, and for a moment he couldn't look away. Quickly he turned his attention back to bandaging his own hands and told Lariette not to overdo it. She smiled, saying that she was just checking and wouldn't have enough mana to continue anyway. Looking at her left hand, she noticed it was already looking much better. The cleansing magic was still working within it. Sweat beaded on her forehead from exertion, but she felt the magic still present in his body. She shared her findings with him, explaining that his body could only hold a certain amount of purification magic at once, and until his left hand was fully healed, other parts of his body wouldn't respond to the magic. Asher, pouring himself more tea, processed the information. He was surprised, but he agreed to let her continue cleansing him, albeit cautiously. Lariette reassured him, promising she would take full responsibility and get everything done before her time was up. She took the tea from him and drank it, determined to see her work through to the end. The Duke couldn't quite understand what Lariette meant when she said she would do everything before she died. She quickly clarified that she meant she would complete her work as quickly as possible. After hearing this, Asher decided to ask her a question that had been on his mind. He wanted to know if she was afraid of him. It was clear from the way he hesitated that he had been thinking about it for some time. After all, he thought he looked terrifying. Lariette smiled sweetly, covering her mouth slightly with her hand. "Do I have any reason to be afraid of you?" she asked, her tone light. But then, her expression became more serious. She decided to address the rumors about him, the so-called demon of war. After all, Duke Candle had single-handedly won a war that had seemed destined to fail, earning the title of national hero. Lariette was convinced that envious members of the imperial family had spread these rumors to undermine his influence. She also believed that the curse he bore wasn't a result of his own actions, but rather the malicious intent of the magician who had cast it. Her words shocked Asher. He had long been convinced of his own terrible reputation, but Larette's perspective was the complete opposite. She told him that he was not the source of fear. Only the magician who had cursed him deserved that fear. Lariette gently placed her palms on his face, smiling warmly as she spoke. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice steady. "I only fear that you might not want to see me again." At these words, Asher blushed deeply, suddenly embarrassed by the situation. He immediately asked her to let go of him, feeling flustered by the physical contact and her honest words. Turning away, he quickly suggested they meet for dinner at 7 that evening, a proposition that surprised Lariette. She quickly composed herself and gave a cheerful yes, even though in reality her consent wasn't necessary. Asher, now even more flustered, hurriedly left the room, leaving Lariette alone. As she walked through the corridor later, Lariette reflected on the situation. She realized that Asher was perhaps more sensitive to touch than he let on, as his quick agreement to dinner had seemed to stem from her touch. Just then, someone called out to her from behind. It was Holstein, the loyal butler of the Candle family. He asked if she had met with the Duke, to which Lariette smiled and replied that it was thanks to him that she had found her way to the Duke's office so quickly, which had allowed her to arrange the dinner meeting. This revelation surprised the butler, as he knew the Duke hadn't shared a meal with anyone for a long time. After the death of the former Duchess, the Duke had eaten alone. But now Lariette was going to have dinner with him. Holstein, smiling, asked her to take good care of the Duke. Lariette laughed, saying that they were simply having dinner together. However, it was clear that the butler had a different understanding of the situation. Later that day, Holstein appeared at Asher's office, carrying a large book titled A Guide to Successful Dates. The butler looked at Asher with confusion, but he knew that Asher had been taught meal etiquette as a child and that no new rules had appeared since then. Realizing the book wasn't about etiquette, Holstein felt that it might be about something else entirely. Asher, now looking uncomfortable, realized that he was actually afraid the sorceress, who was 5 years younger than him, might laugh at him during their dinner. Holstein presented the book to Asher, suggesting he read it. Asher, however, was not interested and immediately dismissed the suggestion, saying it had nothing to do with him. He brushed aside the book as if it were useless, which caused Holstein to become somewhat exasperated. In 27 years of service, Holstein had never felt more useful than now. After a few minutes, the butler opened the book in front of Asher and began reading a few of the rules that a man who had invited a woman to dinner might need to know. Asher tried to pretend he hadn't heard Holstein's comment, acting almost like a child before quickly leaving the office, just as he had that morning. Lariette asked if she could make a small change to their contract. Without hesitation, Asher agreed. Moving a little closer, she explained that the payment seemed insufficient compared to the amount of purification magic she had spent. Asher, surprised, noted how directly she spoke. He wasn't used to such frankness, as he mostly only communicated with Holstein. He quickly realized that while money wasn't a problem for him, the contract needed more than just financial adjustments. The additions she suggested were